Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of This is Revolution Podcast. We, of course, have a very good show tonight. We have Sam Seder on tonight, and I do want to say this before I even bring in my co-host. Coming from the music industry and then being in this industry, one thing I've always appreciated is the help of elder professionals that have, a bigger platform. And in the music world, I got a lot of help from bands like Faith Moore and Godflesh, Justin Broderick and Godflesh, which helped out, tremendously. And in this world, it's people like Doug Lane that have helped us out a lot, and Sam Seder, who has platformed Pascal and I. So I just want to say big shout out to Sam, because we're a really small show and he doesn't have to do that. But the fact that he does, we really appreciate that. That being said, let me bring in my homie, my co-host, my dog. He is the man of the Mau Mau Hour. He has a very popular piece right now. Are black people the crash test dummies for the Democratic Party? He is the Pascal Robert.
Peace and greetings to the chat. Peace and greetings to the audience. Peace and greetings, Jason Miles.
Are you ready for tonight, Pascal?
I'm ready, man. Yeah, I really like Sam. I think he's a cool guy.
I feel like an idiot because I had been watching this. Someone had uploaded the documentary about Air America to YouTube, but they didn't put it under the name. They put it under a different name, and I found it, but it was in parts. I want to say they put it in like 15-minute increments, probably to not get it pulled down. And I kept telling myself, send it to Pascal. But as you know, as maybe the people watching don't know, I've been having massive wives because made these ridiculous moves without planning anything out. I moved to a place that has like no infrastructure for fiber optic connections. So I'm kind of stuck with a subpar internet connection, but good enough to do the show. So I kept forgetting to give it to you and send it to you because I kept going. I had to like physically drive to the place and hammer out problems. So I apologize.
It's quite all right.
But I made a clip and I made some corrections to the clip because originally when I posted it, I had the wrong year on a movie that I posted. And then people keep asking, what movie is that? What movie is that? The movie is called Talk Radio with Eric Bogosian. Is the probably best role he ever did. Really enjoyed that movie. And it came out in 1988. And I had to make some editing to that so we don't get hit with a demonetization strike. So before we bring in Brother Seder, let's play the clip.
Who won't be able to stop it, Ken?
Brother, government, corporations, you're a bunch of fascists. They want to control everybody's mind. But hey, freedom's an important thing, just like you always say, Bear. See, the best things, Bear. Listen to you all the time, man. Great.
Kent, you're an idiot. I sincerely hope you do not represent the future of this country, because if you do, we are in such shape.
Man, you're so funny, man. That's why I love to listen to your show. That's why all the kids listen to you, man. Plus, these goons push you around, all the kids listen to you, man.
You discuss a lot of serious subjects on this show.
We have 2 writers assigned to us every day from like 4 to 9.
Great.
Who are the writers? Who are we going to have on our show?
It's going to be an ever-changing thing.
Oh, okay.
But At least we have two.
Okay, great.
I'm just happy about that.
I'm not nervous only because, both Sam and I are so passionate about this. We spend so much time talking about these issues anyway, and had for a couple of years always wished that we had a talk radio show, and now we finally have one. But if I'm not good at this, I don't want to be here being a kind of a drag on the station. I would want them to be honest with me and say, look, we thought this was going to work out, and it's just not working out, so we're going to have to replace you. That's totally fine.
I have to say that I almost totally agree with Janine. I would want them not to be honest with me. I'd want them to come to me and say, Sam, you're very ill.
The rise of conservative talk radio following the repeal of the Federal Communication Commission's Fairness Doctrine in 1987 has had profound impact on the political landscape of the United States. Taking advantage of the newly liberalized regulatory order, a wave of reactionary hosts, most notably Rush Limbaugh, took to the air to propagate their far-right political message. Indeed, they formed the vanguard of opposition to the Democratic Party administration of Bill Clinton. And following the constitutional coup d'etat that installed George W. Bush as president, the rightist talkers emerged as key regime propagandists. While it is perhaps an exaggeration to claim that talk radio created the political divisions that bisect American society, conservative domination of the medium certainly fed the growing radicalism of the reactionary right. The power of talk radio, both to groom and mobilize elements of the American public, was not lost in the left flank of Capitol. And in 2004, Air America, a progressive talk radio network, was founded. Yet this experiment failed, and in 2010, the network was shut down. What was the American media landscape like in the 2000s? What explains the failure of Air America? And will the new plethora of independent online left media outlets be able to overcome the issues that brought down liberal talk radio? And more. This is Revolution.
I should hang. I'm a hypocrite. I ask for sincerity and I lie. I denounce the system as I embrace it. I want money and power and prestige. I want ratings and success. I don't give a damn about you or the world. That's the truth. For this, I could say I'm sorry, but I won't. Why should I? I mean, who the hell are you anyways, you audience? You're on me every night like a pack of wolves because you can't stand facing what you are and what you've made. Yes, the world is a terrible place. Yes, cancer and garbage disposals will get you. Yes, a war is coming. Yes, the world is shut to hell and you're all goners. Everything's screwed up and you like it that way, don't you? You're fascinated by the gory details. You're mesmerized by your own fear. You revel in floods, car accidents, unstoppable diseases. You're happiest when others are in pain. That's where I come in, isn't it? I'm here to lead you by the hand through the dark forest of your own hatred and anger and humiliation. I'm providing a public service. You're so scared. You're like a little child under the covers. You're afraid of the boogeyman, but you can't live without him.
Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to... All right. That was a long intro, but I really liked the movie Talk Radio. I watched it when I was like 12.
I can tell.
Right?
I can tell you
Right?
weren't. I can tell you weren't.
I was into this shit like a motherfucker.
No
Let's bring in the man of the hour. He is the host of the Majority Report, the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We got him because we couldn't get Janine. Sam Seder.
That I have to say, that is probably really the explanation of my entire career, to be honest with you. When they wanted Janine, and they couldn't get her, they were like, all right, whatever, we'll take that guy.
I totally tried to find Janine Garofalo's email, and it is hidden.
That does not exist. I can assure you that does not exist.
And I tried to email whoever said that they were managing her at the time, and I never got a response. So apparently Janine does not show up on this show.
I doubt that Janine even ever got the hold of that email. That is not how she, honestly, like, connecting with Janine is one of the oddest things in the world that you can imagine. But I won't go into the details, but I saw her actually last week, and if I told you how that went down, you wouldn't believe it. It's honestly like a spy movie. Like, we have to meet at a certain place. There is no communication that takes place. She doesn't travel with her phone. No, it's a throwback. It's a throwback.
She's just famous enough that I was working for a kids TV show, and I was out with some guys that were guests on the show that were actors that are like somewhat recognizable. They're not on we call them B-list, right? And one of them always plays a very wholesome role. And we were at a bar, literally watching a baseball game, and he was drinking a beer. And someone was trying to take his picture. I remember him being like, dude, can you not do that? Because if you take my picture, you send it to TMZ, then I'm a big drunk and it's really going to fuck up my shit. So can you not like do that? And I was like, damn, that sucks, because you're not even like that fan.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. I mean, that is, particularly, back in the aughts when we were doing Air America, and before then, Janine was one of the few people that was basically allowed to go on TV and speak up against the war. And they would invite her on specifically because she was an actress. And then the first thing they would say is like, who are you to talk about this? You're an actress. As if like she somehow apparated in the, the studio. And the experience of being famous is one thing, but the experience of being famous and then hated like she was. I mean, I think, it's sort of hard to understand for, I think, people who didn't live through that era, how violent and threatening it was, and how isolated you felt. If you were against the war, if you had a problem with what was going on with the 2000 election, it was really isolating. And I think, to lead into Air America, I think that's why when Air America launched, the enthusiasm that it generated was so huge, because there was nothing even remotely like it.
There's nothing.
I'm looking forward to actually, because Sam, you and I are contemporaries in age, and
I'm a little older than you are.
A little bit, just 2 years, and we don't have to go there. But we were old enough to remember this era. And as I told you, I started blogging around 2007, but I was an Air America listener, and I remember the 2008 election. I lived in Florida. I did not vote for Bush, and I remember the controversy. And it's amazing how in the view of where we are today politically in America, that seems like eons ago in terms of what has transpired. But what's really fascinating is that we have a whole cadre and generation and group of people who are like, we're radical, we're Marxist Leninists, we're sock dams, we're this, we're this and that. And what really makes me realize is that in 2000, you were radical just for challenging the war on terror, just for challenging the Bush administration. No one was really talking about Marxism, dialectical materialism. No. That didn't exist. But literally, what constituted the most radical thing on the left during the Bush years was Code Pink.
Yep.
Cold.
Well,
No,
code
relax,
pink is still
Cole.
so. Look, Sam. Let's go back. Let's go back to 2001, 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about, or talk to the people about the political climate during that time and how that moment kind of, I want to say rehabilitated George Bush Jr., but really cemented his legacy as the president. Because I think a lot of people, because of Trump, we've forgotten the backlash to Bush. And what was funny was watching your documentary. It's taking place for the second Bush election.
That's right. I mean, we started
John Kerry.
Yep.
And there's a big ramp up to, this is the big bad. And if the big bad gets into office, we'll fight these wars that won't end. And everything's going to be horrible if the big bad gets in office. And he won decidedly. But take us back to that time and what the media landscape looked like, because now we're about around the time that Air America comes to be, we're about not quite 20 years, like 13, 14 years in to deregulation, to the point where now you're getting a big swell of right-wing voices. The movie that I showed, Talk Radio, actually the man who it's based on was not a right-wing voice. Actually,
no, it was Berg,
left and was murdered.
Yeah, I think was it Berg? Was he in Chicago or Detroit? I can't remember. I
believe it was Colorado.
Exactly. Colorado, right? And but let me just I'll speak to 2001, but I just want to reiterate what Pascal said, was that there was no language. I mean, even during Occupy, these concepts were not. People were not fluent in them in the way that they are now. There was no dialect. I mean, look, I knew Marxists. I knew Marxists in college, but there was no, there was just simply no discussion of it in like any type of mass media, or even in like, even to the extent that there was subcultures, there wasn't much there. I mean, I remember having Bernie on in 2004, and it was like, whoa, like he identifies as a socialist, and it was, but there was the language didn't exist. We were so far removed from that, that yes, Code Pink was as radical as it got, and it wasn't. It was really just, the radicalism was only insofar as how much you were willing to speak out and express dissent. It was not ideologically based in the way that, it wasn't rooted in any type of, that language just did not exist. In fact, at that time in 2004, and this was also the case during the 2000s, frankly, 2001 and really in the years following Limbaugh's ascent in '88 is when he started, but he immediately skyrocketed. The word liberal was as pejorative as it is today, but from the right. I mean, it was
even from people like Stern.
Oh, I mean, everybody. In fact, the reason why we use the term progressive today was that people felt they had to abandon the word liberal because it was perceived as too far left.
Yeah.
I mean, I know, like I'm talking like I'm from Mars, for people who are in their 20s and 30s, because now, to the extent that you hear the word liberal as a pejorative, it's always coming from the left as opposed to the right. But in 2000, there was a couple of things happening, and George Bush was wildly unpopular by the time the summer came along. And they were beginning, I cannot remember the timing of the tax cuts that he was pushing, but I feel like it was in the fall. And not only that, in the September issue of Newsweek, which never ultimately came out, and I actually interviewed the editor of Newsweek who talked about this piece, and he disputes some of what I'm retelling, but not. not in a specific way that I think that the gist of the story is incorrect. They were going to, I had understood that Newsweek was going to put this on the cover of their magazine at the time. And understand, Newsweek and Time at that point were the only magazines that Americans read. There was, like, it's sort of hard to remember that, but like Newsweek and Time were the two magazines that America read. It was like the networks. And Newsweek was either going to put on their cover, they certainly ran with the story at one point, or they certainly had the story, that there was an argument that had broke out on the Supreme Court when, oddly enough, I think it was Russian judges had visited over the summer, and about the Bush v. Gore ruling. And the story in Newsweek was about the fracturing that was taking place on the Supreme Court, because I from my estimation, and I was obsessed with that election. In fact, I made a low budget movie that was sort of somewhat. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's not even, you don't even know the half of it. But it was sort of obsessed around that notion. And I had taken hundreds of pictures of my TV during the recount. It was obsessive. And there was like this sort of shock, I think, that the liberal establishment felt, particularly in the legal establishment, because they didn't think that the Supreme Court would ever take that case. And they were shocked by it because it was the most naked example of what a lot of like critical legal studies people had been saying about the court for a long time, which is they're political. And it became a shock for a lot in the legal establishment, I think.
Well, you know, it's funny that you said it, because I was actually practicing law when the Bush v. Gore case came down. And I was actually working in the Florida judiciary system as a case manager in the domestic violence unit. And I remember most of my friends out of law school being horrified by that case. It's going to be the time is so far, but Bush v. Gore, there are people who were regular. I have friends, and I was one of them, but I have friends who would regularly monitor the Supreme Court. Like they took it seriously. They would seriously like watch on the Mondays and Thursdays when decisions came out what the court was doing, because they took the court to be a very serious institution. I know many, many attorneys who literally gave up on taking the Supreme Court seriously.
Yep.
As a matter of fact, as a result of Bush v. Gore. Let me tell you how ridiculous Bush v. Gore was. Bush v. Gore was so ridiculous that Dershowitz wrote a book about how they got it wrong.
Yeah.
Dershowitz was looked at as more of a leftist figure during this era
That's how bad
than he is now.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I mean, it rocked the institution, and there was a sense coming in August. I mean, over the course of that summer, that's this stuff like that the shock that they had felt was starting to wear off, and people were actually starting to speak up about it. I mean, there was big protests at the Bush inauguration, but they were hidden. It was really the beginning of. It was the first time that I remembered, anyways, that there was like free speech zones. And the protesters were put behind the what do you call those? The bleachers. They were put behind the bleachers, so you couldn't see them. The TV never recorded them, but there was, and I don't know that there was like, there certainly wasn't 50, 100,000 of them, but there was thousands of people protesting an inauguration, which never really happened before, as far as I knew. And there was a sense that this was catching up with Bush. He was not popular. He was, and then 9/11 hits, and it is a completely different political world.
It changed the whole nature. I mean, it's funny that there are kids nowadays who are politically active who literally were too young to remember this, that are like adults right now. But what is really funny, right, is that people don't understand that, first of all, the idea of a third-party candidate was supposed to be delegitimized by the fact everyone used to say that, what's his name? Lost Florida. Nader. Ralph Nader. Nader lost Florida. If it wasn't for Nader, I mean, there was like
Nader becomes a, I don't want to say a character, but he's a bit of a figure in the documentary, and it brought me back to that time, because if you ever meet people, and I want to say this, which sounds funny to me because I'm the baby on this show at 44, which is kind of nice, right? And the irony, I have the oldest kids out of everybody here. When you meet people that voted for Nader in 2000, and I don't know if it's like this for you too, Pascal, those were like the crazy left wingers. We're not talking Marxists. If you voted for Nader in 2000, you were like, it was beyond Bernie, because there was no, he was doing some big
you were considered like a whack job. If you voted for Nader.
And there's a scene where there's a scene where, go ahead.
I voted for Nader. And now I voted for Nader in New York, and they had a thing that was called, and I was in New York, and but they did have there was a website. This is web 1.0, I guess, when if you were lucky to get DSL. There was like an exchange or a swap thing where you would put in, I'm voting for Nader in New York, to trade with someone in Florida, ostensibly. I mean, you didn't know who it was. You just put it up there. And that was, I mean, I probably would have voted for Nader anyways in New York at that time. But I just should say for full disclosure. But yes, I remember what you're about to talk about when Randy Rhoads had him on.
Randy Rhoads goes off on Ralph Nader as a guest on her show, and she blames Ralph Nader, and I don't know if she's walked this back since. She blames Ralph Nader for George Bush.
Can I explain to you why that's absolutely horse crap?
Go for it.
Don't forget, I lived in Florida. It's horse crap, because don't forget, the difference between Bush and Gore came down to like less than 100 votes, I think, or less than 5 or something. It's very ridiculous.
100, depending on which count you look at any given point, because the times went back, but it's well under 1,000. Let's put it
under 1,000, right? People fail to realize something. According to the actual record, there were 200,000 Democrats in the state of Florida that voted for George Bush.
I mean, let's put it this way. It's one of those things where it's impossible to know a but for in this situation. You could say it was the butterfly ballots with where you had all these old Jewish folks in Palm Beach voting for, Pat Buchanan, which highly unlikely that they meant to do that. The thing I think that there was anger towards Nader was that he had originally promised not to run in contested states, and then changed his mind. And I think that was probably a certain amount of overconfidence. I don't know what it was, but you could also say like Al Gore was an idiot for not campaigning with Bill Clinton, who was, despite what you think about his politics.
Al Gore was an idiot for having Joe Lieberman as a vice presidential candidate.
And Al Gore was an idiot for having Joe Lieberman. I should say that character in that movie was a fictionalized Joe Lieberman's son. My hatred for Joe Lieberman knows no bounds. Like I say, there's a bunch of things. Nader became I think the easiest thing to blame on some level, because it was it was just a question of him deciding to go down there. And I think, from my perspective at the time, I was like, he promised also to build the Green Party, and he didn't do it. He more or less walked away from it. And after that, and I think that contributed to a lot of anger towards Nader too, or at least prevented for a lot of pushback, because part of the promise at that time was to build the third party. And he literally walked away from it. And so I think that is where some of that blame came from, or at least the absence of people sort of defending him.
Well, the thing is, though, it's really easy, right? I mean, I think we would all agree that for a lot of kind of existential reasons, it's the millennium, it's the new new century, the year 2000, all of the hoopla, the Y2K problem, all of that nonsense that was being thrown out around the fact that we were coming into the 21st century that we were hearing, and we had this election. So there was all kinds of ridiculous existential angst about this election. But I will have to admit that you did feel a shift in the political energy in America as a result of the Bush-Gore election in 2000 that took us into a darker place that I didn't feel again really until Trump in 2016.
Yeah.
But the thing that is interesting, though, is that the trajectory of really, really bad presidents from, I would say Carter, Reagan, Bush, the father, Clinton, Bush the son, and Obama. That trajectory, the neoliberal, like the last that whole period in the neoliberal turn, which no one was even, unless you were an academic who had been writing for 20 years, no one was saying the word neoliberal, but these are all things that come about as a result of the 2008 crash. And what people also have to realize is that, and I know Jason knows this, the economy started rocking and rolling in the Bush years.
Why is that? Because Sam forced me to write part 2 because I was going to lag and not write 2 to my piece. So while I'm down here in Mexico writing part 2, then Doug Lane convinced me to write a book. So I'm doing all this goddamn research into deregulation, and deregulation starts lightly under Carter, ramps up under Clinton, and
under Reagan.
Under Reagan. And well, it really ramps up under Clinton because that's when we start seeing Glass-Steagall. And by 99, Glass-Steagall's all gone. But 94 is really the year where the bones of Glass-Steagall really start coming out. So by the time the Clinton era ends, we see an end to Glass-Steagall, and we're also starting to see a jump in home value. So the Clinton administration becomes a great come up for middle class, just based off deregulation. And you get so much more of it with Bush, and it gets kind of these weird mixed results. So you have Enron on one hand with Bush, right? And you also have this blow up of the middle class. And I'm not just talking about white folks. People of color now can move on up out of the hood and buy houses in these nice new suburbs that are popping up everywhere. The McMansions, as you people call them, are popping up everywhere. And of course, fast forward to the end of the aughts, and those areas of McMansions, like the central part of California, became literal ghost towns, where these houses that people bought for $500,000 and $600,000 were worth, pennies on the dollar after that, and they were literally being advised by their tax people to walk away from them. But I do feel you on that move politically, Pascal, because I believe that people really thought the prosperity was here again, and also we're talking about an era of anti-politics.
Yeah, without a doubt. I think that's
a part of.
And also, we should say, in terms of the big deregulation under Clinton, was the Telecommunications Act, I think of 94, maybe it was 96, 94. And and so much of our news is a function of that. So much of the ability of Rupert Murdoch to dominate our news, both in print and in terms of TV, came out of that. And yes, the .com boom. I mean, it was nuts. There's was it the end of the century? What was that book?
The .com boom happens around like 99, 2000. And I remember,
the .com crash.
I remember because I was working in real estate finance at the time. as a lowly paper pusher at that time. And I remember we had a very, I would say maybe 2-3 months of a shakeup. And then all those offices got replaced with real estate offices and title companies.
The other thing that was happening, and I don't know when that started, I feel like it might have happened, it started happening, but we had interest rates were dropping significantly.
That was fueling the real estate market.
And people just were trying to find a place to
Alan
make their money work.
was actually still respected as a genius.
Yes. Yes, he was. But so that was the era, and people were very depoliticized. And part of it was, I think, like, I mean, Pascal, you can tell me, your perspective on this, but my sense was that, Generation X was so overshadowed by the boomers, and was, our parents more or less were, of a generation where, you had like the yippies. Like there was a debate. There was literally a traveling debate. I think when I was in college, maybe, in the mid 80s, maybe it launched after that, but Abbie Hoffman had come out of hiding at that point, and he was doing a tour. And then subsequent to that, he ended up doing a tour with Jerry Rubin, which was the yippies versus the yuppies. And it was just that dichotomy where both like the yippies seemed to go nowhere and the yuppies seemed to be sort of like a bleak prospect. That is where I feel like society was.
Well, I'm glad. Listen, Sam, we're gonna go here, man, because we are contemporaries. We remember a lot of people our age consider the Reagan years their glory days.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard for people to understand. People in the early to mid 50s, even if they hated Reagan, they loved the feel, because we were so trapped in capitalist realism. Yeah, Reagan was racist and we hated everything, but Reagan was like a very reactionary president that a lot of people hated, but a lot of people liked the money. That was great for the middle class. It was horrible, definitely, for particularly poor Black folk who were getting underclass ideology, mass incarceration. But let's think about, I relegate this particularly to like Black popular culture. This is the birth of the golden age of hip hop. There's all this like the hyper capitalization of Black popular culture. The first multimillionaire athletes, basketball, Magic Johnson, Dr. J, the whole culture industry in the 80s. It starts in the 70s, but it's like really hyper capitalized.
Greed is good.
Yeah,
Greed is good.
Not just Black popular culture, across the board, right? It's like, and it's just infused everywhere. And the movie that I think really demonstrates how bad it got generationally in terms of the baby boomers, that when you really see the transparent kind of this sellout nature of what they became. Anyone remember the movie The Big Chill?
Yep.
Of course. It's huge.
The Big Chill, very important movie. For those who have never seen The Big Chill, the plot of The Big Chill is about a bunch of young professional, like probably in their early 40s, late 30s,
younger,
in their 30s.
Yeah, early 30s, I would say.
Former 60s hippies. So these were people who were like radicals in the 60s. They were like student for the Democratic Society. They were down with the Panthers. They were like, the whole movie, the soundtrack to the movie is all kinds of 60s music, right? And one of their friends from the 60s, they all went to the University of Michigan again. I believe that was the school.
Had died.
One of their friends committed suicide. And they all, who hadn't seen each other for a year, go to the guy's funeral who committed suicide. And they're all just kind of like, smoking weed, like, oh, this is so rebellious. Oh my God, we haven't done this since college. And they're all just like listening to all this like 60s R&B music, which is a song soundtrack. And the whole theme of the show is how during the 80s, they're all very successful and they're all waxing rhapsodic about how basically they kind of sold out all of that liberal left stuff that they were protesting about, and they were getting paid. Like, one of the women is a lawyer, and she basically like literally says that, like, if someone says like, she says, I represent real estate companies. I do real estate law. Yeah. And someone says, like, there was a time that I used to think I would look forward to, representing like Bobby Seale. And then someone said something like now you're worried about like, some young black kid his age that you want to make sure gets like, incarcerated or something like that. And it was so transparent. And I'm going to say right now, when I see the big chill, and I think in the 50-year counter-revolution, right? Do you know who I think about when I see the big chill? I think about the Clintons. Because the Clintons are the big chill people.
Yep. I think that's right. And that's, so by the time we get to, I think, Bush v. Gore, people are so depoliticized. There's that, it's the big chill. It's that sort of sense of like, what are we doing? We don't know. We're just going to ride out the sort of like the explosive economy.
This is so important. Like, this is really, we think about Mark Fisher, capitalist realism. When we talk about the 50-year counter-revolution, it was kids today. There was no left.
No, there was no, there was almost like just a total absence of politics. And then when 9/11 hit, we were so, as a society, so defenseless in terms of being able to respond to the panic and the militarism and the authoritarianism, frankly, that came out of the Bush, because there was no ideology, there was no movement, there was no left, there was no politics that existed. And I just remember, I think probably I went to 3 or 4 different major anti-war protests in those years building up. And it was just so frustrating. And that, there was a lot of people there. Hundreds of thousands, massive protests. And it didn't make a difference. It was barely reported on the television. And there was a real feeling of isolation. And that's why, just to bring it back to Janine, when she would go on television, like she became, she was not she's a political person, and particularly for that era, a fairly, a political person, but she became really important because she was the only voice that was speaking out against. Now, people I don't think realized that like nobody else was allowed to. Like literally she had to be recruited by this organization, Win Without War, because they could not get their experts on. They could not get their professors. They could not get their PhDs. They could not get their former military personnel. They couldn't get anybody on except for Janine, and then maybe Mike Farrell, who was from MASH, this CBS, and this was the era that we were in. So when Air America launched, it was a very, well, first of all, it was a very sort of like extraordinary, it was completely anomalous in terms of the time, and also it was scary. Like when Janine and I left our studios, we had bats because the amount of threats that she would get, that we would get as a station, but she would get as personally was just, I don't think people can fully, sort of understand. And it was scary because no one cared. I just remember going to, during those first couple of years in 2004, 2005, I remember, most of my friends I was still, sort of like felt like I was still in the comedy world. I had, literally, in September of that year, I think I had to go out to LA because a TV show that I had made was airing on this network called Trio, which ultimately went away. It was a small network. But the point being that like I was still in that world well into Air America. And I can't even tell you the hostility that Janine and I got from our own people for doing that. just because people are like, what are you doing? And it's so changed. The culture has so changed. Comedy, like they're so, it's so radically different. But I mean, I can tell you, like my agents, my managers, like friends in the business, I would go to like some shows out there when I was visiting friends, and people were just like, and Janine's, you know, like people were like, is there any way you can get her not to do this anymore? And I'm like,
wow.
I do with it. I mean, it was
do you think,
really,
well, look, I don't, if you don't want to answer this question, that's fine. Do you think that her time on Air America hurt her career? I mean, she did Mystery Men after it.
No, I don't think she did it.
Was that before it?
I'm pretty sure that was before.
Oh, wow.
It was definitely before. I mean, it was during her anti-war stuff. I think there was a little bit, I think it made people a little bit nervous. And I think that in some respects, it probably did hurt her. Although, like, I mean, I know that she lost some gigs, but I mean, could she recover from it? I mean, you know, it's so hard to sort of parse this stuff out. But without a doubt, there was certainly a hostility to what we were doing. And here's the difference between 2000, let's say 4 or 5, 6, and 2016, 2017. I remember just going to like out to dinner with friends, or maybe go to like 4 or 5, you know, like out to dinner with like 4 or 5, you know, 2 or 3 other couples.
Yeah. And
I would talk about this stuff, and I would try not to, but I was so immersed in it. And I would just start going like, you don't understand what's going on. You know, what's going on with the EPA, what's going on. I mean, the Bush administration was just horrible. It was just absolutely horrible. And people would look at me like I was like a complete freak. They had no idea what I was talking about. And cut to 10, 12 years later, not exactly those same people, but more or less those same people are texting me shit about the Trump administration that I don't know. Like, it was a complete reversal in terms of the awareness of politics. It was just, I can't even tell you how isolating it was.
The extent of lack of politicization. Well, this is the thing. I want to go back to Air America. I used to listen to Air America regularly. I called in during Air America one time. This is going to blow people away. This is going to blow people away. These were considered the radicals because they were on Air America. Rachel Maddow. Rachel Maddow was considered radical.
Did she win a Pulitzer while she was? Didn't she win a Pulitzer?
No.
She never won a Pulitzer.
Rachel Maddow.
She may have won a Pulitzer, but not at Air America.
Not at Air America.
God rest he died. I used to like this guy a lot. Ed Schultz. Ed Schultz was a big deal. I called into Ed Schultz's show.
He was not on Air America.
No, he wasn't on it, but he was a big radio. He was in the left constellation. Of radio. Ed Schultz was. But this is the people. Before MSNBC, I remember when MSNBC started. Before MSNBC started, right? They basically took a lot of Democrats who were kind of progressive Democrats who were on left media. They got Rachel Maddow. They got Ed Schultz.
No, they get Al Franken?
No. You're going back. You're not going back far enough. When MSNBC started in 2004, the lineup was Scarborough, was Tucker Carlson. I mean, prior to that, it was Dan Abrams. It was not political. It was Pat Buchanan. The whole thing was right wing.
Yes.
And I mean, I would go on. Janine would get asked to go on Scarborough Country. It was on at like 10 p.m.
Scarborough Country.
She would say, "I'm not going on unless Sam comes on." That's like I say. I mean, you brought me on that way as a joke, but that's literally basically the story of my career in this world. And Tucker Carlson had a show on MSNBC.
Tucker Carlson had a show.
Pat Buchanan, I think, either had a show. At one point, they had Michael Savage. I mean, he was on, I think, like probably in the early aughts, and he didn't last too long. But that's Tucker. But MSNBC used to be right wing. They hired Keith Olbermann, and he, around 2005, just sort of stumbled on being, sort of liberal. And then
something. What's that? Donahue was on MSNBC. He gets fired.
Yeah, but that was in like the 2002, in the run up to the Iraq War.
Right, to run up to the Iraq War.
And you know who else was on there? Because I remember this. We used to do a phone call. What's that guy's name? No. The Grover Norquist had this famous like Wednesday breakfast or something. And so at Air America, we tried to do something like this because there was nothing. There was no left infrastructure or anything like this. And so we had like, Al Frank had sort of led these like phone calls with like some bloggers and this and that. And there was somebody that we had on who was from MSNBC. And like, I would place her, probably to the right of anybody on the prime time of MSNBC now, like significantly to the right. But she was the leftmost person at MSNBC. She contributed.
You said something that's very important. People don't know the blogosphere was serious back then.
Oh yeah, no, that was it.
People don't understand. I got into blogging a little late. I started in 2007. People like Greenwald, people were blogging and so on. These guys literally
Duncan Black at Eschaton.
They were people who just literally created a website.
Joanne Reed says Joanne Reed. That's a big blog.
They started a website, started a blog site, and they started writing, and people picked them up.
Yeah. No, I mean Atrios got so big that they wrote him into
WordPress. It was like all this stuff that started to develop.
Jane Hampshire at Fire Dog Lake, and
Ta-Nehisi Coates also started as a blogger.
There was, it was a very big.
Say it again, Fire Dog. I was a part of Fire Dog. People don't realize Fire Dog Lake was a big deal. Listen, there is a book that needs to be written about the blogosphere of the early aughts, because I'll tell you right now, I have like before Obama, during the Bush years, there was a lot of good writing. Lot of good writing in the independent blogosphere. The blogosphere was the precursor to online left media.
Well, Pascal and Sam, let me ask you this question. What does that then say when we fast forward now, when the blogosphere has been replaced with 280 characters or less? What does that say about intellectual dishonesty when it comes to report, when it comes to news?
I would say, I mean, I think there's a big problem with, obviously, I'm on YouTube, but I've felt for a long time, particularly not even just Twitter, but YouTube and other, it's problematic insofar as that, like on these blogs, things were a lot more static. So people would write, and then there was like the comment sections in some ways had parity with the blog post.
Yeah,
and it was much easier to there was a lot more checks on a blogger at that time than there is, let's say, on YouTube, because I can say something on my YouTube show and it can be total bullshit and people can go into the chat, but the chat just spins so quickly, it goes away, and that's it. The YouTube will travel, the chat will stay there. But on blog posts, the comments and the scrutiny that you would get, if you were not good and you were not sound, let's just put it this way, if you were not sound in terms of the arguments you were making and you didn't have, proper links and whatnot, you would be discredited over a certain period of time because of the nature of that.
You know what you're saying that's very important? Do you know what the thing about the blogosphere that was destroyed by social media? Because Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube got destroyed. There was a certain meritocracy to the blogging game. You wouldn't get picked up. You wouldn't get recognized unless your stuff was pretty good.
Right. And you had like a whole series of editors at that time. And it was static. I mean, that's the thing. I don't want to, people on the chat getting upset that I'm not dissing the people on the chat as much as I'm dissing the format, because it scrolls through and then it's gone. But these, the comments on a blog post had the essentially same ability to travel and get embedded as the actual post, that it was there. There was a parity between those who would hold the blogger to a certain level of scrutiny and accountability. And so it was a very different world. In fact, the first thing that I did when we got on the Majority Report, it was like, I want to get Atrios on, and I want to get Josh Marshall, and I think actually Bill Scher at the time. I don't, I have a slight divergence with Bill at this point, but at the time, and I was like, there's no way we're going to get him, because I bet you Franken's going to get it and this and that. And they weren't aware of it. I mean, as old as I am now, I was basically the youngest person on Air America. I think maybe Rachel's a little bit younger, but she did not come on as she came on as a producer at first, and very quickly ended up, getting on the show with Liz and Chuck D. But she didn't.
Chuck D. I remember
Yeah,
Chuck D. Al Franken was he was.
Yeah, Franken did the noon to 3 show. Marin did the 9 to noon show. Then Randy Rhoads did 3 to 6, and then Janine and I would do 6 to 9. Then Mike Malloy, and that was the original lineup. And there was 9 to. I'm sorry, Marin did 6 to 9, and 9 to noon was Liz and Chuck D and Rachel Maddow, and that was the original lineup. And then you had people like Steve Earle, who had small, had weekend shows. I mean, there was really some amazing shows. I mean, the lineup was good, and the ratings were actually pretty good. There was really bad management, frankly, 5 times over. You can watch that.
I watched the bounce checks, man.
Oh, yeah,
I watched the bounce checks. That was some like a level insight on the inner workings of that company, watching them tell everybody, hey, sorry, your money's just not here.
That was the first. I mean, I had multiple checks bounced, but at that point, I was coming out of show business. I had a lot of money. I didn't care. I mean, I wasn't going into this at that time to the money was completely secondary. But if you look at that movie and then you multiply that times 5 over the course of 6 years, you'll understand why Air America failed. Like literally there was 6 CEOs and 5 owners over the course of like 5 or 6 years. I mean, it was relentless. I mean, there probably should have been a book about it, but but I will say this in terms of radio. Like, you started in your intro, which I thought was actually excellent, incidentally, Jason.
Thank you.
The question was, can what we do, on YouTube or as a podcast or Twitch or whatever, platform, compete with talk radio? And my answer is no. I don't. I mean, I think we serve a different function in many respects, but talk radio is ubiquitous. You still have so much reach, so much more reach with talk radio. I think it's completely underestimated in terms of what it does to our politics. Completely. I mean,
I think on the conservative side, that's true.
Yes.
The liberal side as well. I mean, look at Amy Goodman.
Amy Goodman is more people. I think more people watch Amy Goodman on digital platforms on YouTube now than listen to her on the radio.
I would say on the radio, and she still comes on cable television.
But living in the heartland of America, Springfield, Missouri, like you live in small town America, and talk radio is critical to people's infrastructure here. Like they have their national. Like if you live in big cities where most people live, like perhaps talk radio isn't as big or as ubiquitous as you might think. But if you spread it across the country, particularly with regions with small populations but a lot of electoral power, it's like you get a lot of bang for your buck by having like these nationally syndicated radio hosts pumping people full of right-wing propaganda and a couple of local dudes who will complain that the Chamber of Commerce is run by communists, right? So, this is I think there's
I think it's completely underestimated. And what happens is you go from your car and all you're listening is you have 2 or 3 choices maybe of right-wing talk radio hosts. That's it, period. You go from your car, you go into the diner, and they're playing Fox there because CNN is maybe cleared in that market. MSNBC is not, and all there is Fox. Yeah. Fox is on in the bar. It's in the diner. It's probably in when you're going to get your muffler fixed. Yeah. It's in the gym, and there is absolutely, I think, no awareness and no ability to stumble on anything that is even dissenting. Like, I don't even think that you need, my experience is such that you don't even need necessarily the right politics to be fighting, to be broadcast there. You just need a politics that's different, so that people have an idea of, wait a second, there isn't unanimity about this. Like, they don't realize, people who live in these media areas have no way of realizing that they are hearing opinion news. Because they don't hear any other opinions that are broadcast in a mass market way. And they don't think that it's like, they think they're listening to the weather. You know what I mean?
I think he did a good job in Hate Inc. at explaining this phenomenon with the way news is shown. And I don't know if anybody watched the Alex Jones trial, but when it was coming out, for his divorce, I think it was, and he was like, I don't do news. This is entertainment.
Yeah, people don't realize that how people get their news, especially if you come from, let's say, a more educated background from a more affluent part of the country, you don't realize there are huge swaths of, and this is not just in America, in Great Britain, people totally misjudged Brexit because they didn't think about what people in small towns that who were getting news from like local Facebook groups were being fed with and things like that.
Well,
I think.
Look, guys, we went an hour. We went an hour right now, and Sam told us he couldn't join us for the bonus half.
I am sorry about that, ladies and
no problem. This is a great conversation. We should have a part 2 to this conversation.
We need to have a part 2 to this conversation.
I'm big fans of all of your work, and I hope to have you guys back on Majority Report soon. As a crew or individuals, which I'm sure we'll do soon. But I am a big fan of what you guys do, so I really appreciate this.
Well, Sam, I want to say thank you again for always giving us a place to shine, I guess. I don't know what's the right word, Pascal, for platforming us.
Well, I mean, that's honestly, like, I'm happy to do it, but it's not my intention is more one, because I appreciate the work you guys do, and glad to sort of like I just enjoy. I've had great conversations with all of you.
Your audience seems to like us as well, too, by the way.
They definitely do. Of course. Who wouldn't?
That's a good point.
There's a long list.
Pascal really reminds me of my dad when he says things like that, because my dad is one of these guys who is like, he's like, I'm humble, and it's like, I don't know, Dad, I don't know if you're that humble. He goes, I'm the most humble. That was it.
Well, we're still going. We're still going and going to do a bonus without Seder. We're probably going to talk about Seder and why he's trying to block Janine from talking to me, because I know that's fucked up, Sam.
We'll work on that. We'll work on that, definitely.
You gotta let her know. Say, Janine, there's this black dude in Mexico. He's got a beautiful house by the ocean. He wants to have you on the show.
That may not be the pitch I use.
I don't know how that's going to work with Janine.
That may not be the pitch I use. Yeah, there you go.
All right. Well, thank you,
guys.
Sam. If you guys are patrons, we will see you in the after hours. If not patrons, it's easy. Patreon.com/BitterLakePresents. Join, and we're going to continue this conversation, because I had several questions for Sam. Didn't get to ask one.
Well, I'm sorry.
I'm going to email you those questions, and then you can reply back in written form.
Perfect.
And Pascal can read them.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Peace.
Bye-bye.